Hey everybody, good morning. Hope you're doing great today. January 10th, 2022. Wow. Wow. Already in the new year. And it is great to see you all in the house of Devo already. And I'm just getting better and better, feeling better. And still a little stuffy in the nose, but doing much better. So it's great to be with you all. Good morning to Tina, Paula, and Bob is in the house. And Paula is in the house too. So totally stoked. We are definitely in Devo Memorial format with remembering our brother Jesus Urbina. And of course, the whole week will be just dedicated to our brother. And probably the whole year, man. What a guy, and super special. So if you caught my last Devo, I did some reading out of another, or from a poem from another dearly departed saint, Nicolette de Sceaux, and that was really cool and very, very cool time. So we're going to be in the Devo in Genesis 45. So that's where we're continuing on. And we kind of finally get to the peak, if you will, of this narrative with Joseph. And this is how it goes. Joseph could stand it no longer. Kind of an interesting start to the chapter, right? Joseph could stand it no longer. What couldn't he stand any longer? Well, his brother Judah was just totally pleading with him. For the longest time, it seemed like. And you'll have to go back in the last Devo to know what he was pleading for. But Joseph just couldn't stand it no longer. And it says, there was many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." And I love this. Sometimes there's times in my life where I can stand it no longer. And I'm sure you're like that too. Hey, God, help, I like to have more patience, but I really can't. I can but no longer. Did you ever feel like things were just boiling over to a point where it was going to go over the pot? But Joseph here, he could not stand. What we're going to see is what he cannot stand is not his anger or his fleshly nature, but it was really his love for them. The love of Christ compels us, the New Testament says. It compels us to love other people. So when we look at the cross and we look at the injustices that were done and how the rulers of the world came at Jesus and literally killed him, silenced him, put an end to the information he was giving out. And it seemed like it was all over, it was all done. Jesus, man, just kept going to the cross with boldness and courage. Our love should be the kind of love where we can stand it no longer. We need to love people. That's how we should think of this. Is that, hey, just as Joseph couldn't stand it any longer not to love his brothers, so that's how it should be with us. We can't stand it any longer. We need to love. That's something. And hey, are you so wrapped up in anger and hate that you no longer are in the mode of loving people and caring for one another, and being compassionate or tolerant, and understanding to people? This is Joseph could not stand it any longer. And it says, there were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, out all of you. So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. And it says, then he broke down and he wept. Oh, isn't that just so cool? He just broke down and he wept. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him. The word of it quietly carried to Pharaoh's palace. So they must have said, hey, something's wrong with Joseph. I mean, this guy is like upset. Have you ever had just an uncontrollable cry? Like that kind of weeping? Just uncontrolled. It was so filled with emotion. Such an outpouring. And I got to imagine that's how this was with Joseph. So it finally gets to the place of verse 3. This is what we've been waiting for. I am Joseph, he said to his brothers. Is my father still alive? But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing in front of them. Please come closer, he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourself for selling me into this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. This famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here, not you, and he is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace and the governor of all Egypt. And I find this so cool. There's some pretty cool gems right here. There's one huge one. Look at how Joseph saw the tragedy that happened to him by his brothers. Did you notice it? It's so different, right? Now, he says, hey, he admits what happened. So Joseph is not that kind of guy who let's not talk about the elephant in the room kind of person. That's always a very uncomfortable situation. But here he does mention, hey, you sold me as a slave. And he says, but don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. Now notice the next line. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. Powerful. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. God had a purpose and a plan. And God sends people ahead of us to prepare and to preserve our lives. Isn't that cool? God sends people ahead of you and I to preserve our lives. It is God who sends them. It is God's work in people. God gives the increase, the Bible teaches, meaning he's the one who works in people's lives and changes their hearts and moves them into places of evangelism, meaning where the love of Christ is compelling them to get out and share and to teach people about Jesus. And it says, God sent me. God sends all of his children ahead of people, right? To preserve their lives. Because what are they offering? Salvation. They're offering them eternal life. And so this is what God does, whether it's in the life of you, Christian. He is sending you ahead of others to preserve their life. This is what God does to a guy like Jesus Urbina. God sends him ahead of others to preserve their lives. He sends them as God sends them as a means of salvation to others. This is what God does. God who sends me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. Did you know that God's using you to go ahead of others to preserve their lives? That's what he's doing. He's teaching you, he's molding you, he's taking you through the trials, he's taking you through the times of leanness, through the times of prosperity, through all the crazy turns in life. And why? Because he is getting things prepared for others. He is preparing you to be able to help out others and give to others on that day. And this is what God's doing in all of his children. It was God who sent me ahead of you to preserve your lives. It's just radical, right? He says, don't be upset. Hey, do you have animosity? Do you have resentment? Do you have bitterness? Joseph could have easily been pretty resentful, don't you think? Thanks, Tina. Appreciate the prayers. Joseph could have been bummed. He could have been all, tweaked. And let's see, what are you tweaked about? What are you so upset about? Have you been sold as a slave, by your family? That's a pretty horrible situation, I must say. And many people, we don't even know what that's like. But here he has this incredible letdown with his family. And he says to them, don't be upset. Why? Because he has perspective. He sees something. He sees that God has prepared a way to preserve their lives through his own life being spared by Egypt and how he has prospered in Egypt. Now, verse 6 says, this famine has ravaged the land for 2 years, will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And then verse 7 is another gem. God has sent me ahead of you. Isn't that cool? God has sent people ahead of you. Before I came to Jesus, I love to think about this. God has sent you, meaning right now, as I think before I knew Christ, I think about this. God sent people ahead of me to keep me alive and to preserve many survivors. God has sent people ahead of me, meaning there was people that came before me. And they had a place, a certain position. And that place and position was to be effectual in my own life. It was to have an effect on my life. And it was to preserve me, right? To cause me to last. To help me to survive. Of course, giving me eternal life. God does ascending for salvation, right? God does ascending for salvation. Now, what if you looked at all your trials like that? God is sending me here as a saving to others, for others. That's what God's doing. There's something I need to go through at this time. And this will be something that will be a saving for another. There's something in the faith of Joseph as he trusts God through the trial that will be the saving of the nation of Israel, really. And that's how we have to look at it. Our trials are opportunities, faith opportunities, that really are preparatory for another's salvation. God will use that trial and the faith that's in that trial as a saving for others. And this happens all the time when someone passes away. What becomes their greatest testimony? What shakes the family at their death? And then they think of their life, and they think of maybe their last days and their faith that they held on to. And that faith that was held on to is what was sent to prepare those people, those family members, to receive God. It is the testimony that will impact their heart and their life for salvation. Tina says, yep, when I came to God, he was asking for forgiveness and how blessed I was for God to love me. Who am I to be loved like that? Yeah, and I hope you're getting that idea that God is just preparing you in your trial, you are the person that is walking ahead of others in our trials for the saving of others. Jesus went through suffering as a sending, right? Went through suffering as a sending of salvation to others. So you guys with me? Jesus went through suffering. Joseph went through suffering as a sending. It's God's way, right? This is God's way as a sending for the salvation of others. So that's why the New Testament always says, be prepared for suffering. Because as it says, our faith is to be refined like gold, right? More precious than fine gold. Our faith is. And so the suffering the suffering that we go through is a part of this sending work of God for salvation. So we are sent through suffering to preserve lives. Very, very cool. So I think it's one of the most profound pictures of Christ right here. That evangelism, of the evangelism of Christ. It is a suffering evangelism. It is an evangelism that goes through trials, extreme pain. But the faith that shines out of the suffering is the sending and for preserving the life of others. That God is seen as glorified within the suffering because people are holding fast. Jesus held fast to the Father. And Joseph is holding fast to the Father in his suffering. And so faith becomes exalted and it shines great through the trial. Super cool, man. And super cool. Like I say, it's probably one of the most profound truths and pictures of Jesus in the story of Joseph. So it was God who sent me here, not of you, and he is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace and the governor of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me master over all the land of Egypt. So come down to me immediately. You can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me with all your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and everything you own. I will take care of you there, for you are still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise, your household and all your animals will starve. So remember, it was going to be a 7-year famine. They're in 5 years, or they're in 2. So this dialogue between Joseph and his brothers has been happening for quite a while. I mean, I could imagine probably a good year. that they've been in contact with one another since Joseph's finally revealed himself. Then Joseph added, "Look, you can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that I really am Joseph." Now they're still cannot believe this. "Go tell my father of my honored position here in Egypt. Describe for him everything you have seen, and bring my father here quickly." Weeping with joy, he embraced Benjamin, and Benjamin did the same. They kissed. Then Joseph kissed each brothers and wept for them, and after they began talking freely to him with him. So the rest of the chapter is about just Pharaoh and Joseph, and you see their relationship, one of being really strong. And it's an important little section just because there's going to come a time where the new Pharaoh's not going to be so kind to Joseph and Joseph's people. And there is a kind of a backstory that we kind of gather that the Egyptians, we've already been told, are not very fond of the Hebrews. Now, the Hebrews were shepherds, and so they were out in the field a lot, and if you will, aristocracy of Egypt didn't look on that very well, that kind of lifestyle, living amongst the animals, if you will, not very sophisticated, not very clean. And so the relationship between Pharaoh, who represented, of course, Egypt, and Joseph is kind of important because Joseph's family now is going to move really close to Joseph in the land of Egypt. And if the Pharaoh doesn't like them, thinks they're kind of disgusting, it's going to be a problem. But it starts off good, and it starts off on good soil, if you will. And the Pharaoh basically opens up his riches to the people of Joseph. And again, just as Joseph has received all the wealth of Pharaoh, he's able to distribute that wealth to his own family. And that's so much like Christ. Christ, has everything of the Father, and yet he's able to distribute everything to us, and we are inheritors of everything in Christ. And so when you become adopted into the family of God, you are not a second-class child. You become a chosen child of God, handpicked by the Father. And with that comes an inheritance, the Bible teaches. And when you realize who Jesus is, as not only God's Son, only begotten Son, but also you realize that Jesus is God in human flesh, you go, wow, that's quite an inheritance. So a very wonderful peek to the narrative we got to. A lot of beautiful reconciliation there, but reconciliation starts with us. It starts on our part. It starts on the Christian's heart, not to hold resentment or bitterness, but to see God's sovereign hand in our lives, in what he's doing in our lives, and that our trials, our suffering is a sending of suffering for the salvation of others. And so very, very cool. Very cool. And you know what? It's very cool that you guys are doing so much chatting on the comment corner. Super stoked about that as well. You could always let other people know about the Devos as well. Just to say, hey, if you're interested in a Devo in the morning, 9 o'clock, get in there, going through the Bible. So we'll see where the Bible goes from here. We've been with Joseph for quite a while, and now we'll see kind of how this kind of plays out at the end of this book. So very interesting. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that chapter. and we will talk to you tomorrow. Okay? Thanks a lot for the prayers. Definitely feeling them and feeling much better. So you guys have a great one. Take care. Bye-bye.